Hi folks, Bob Collins for Diver Supply. I'm here with my buddy Eric. Eric is a fairly accomplished person. Tech diver extraordinaire.
Not extraordinary.
Aircraft pilot.
Yeah, pilot, yeah.
Yeah. Scuba instructor.
Instructor, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks
and
to you.
A few other things under your belt.
Yeah, yeah.
That's part of what Eric and I have in common is scuba diving, of course, and we've become friends over other things like motorcycling and watches, and
Absolutely.
dive computers and such.
Yep.
Eric has a small collection of pretty cool dive watches, and I have a lot of people that have made comments about, hey Bob, what do you watch it? You know, what's your watch in this particular video that you're doing? You know, Eric and I were hanging out one afternoon and talking about watches, dive watches, and I thought, well, in combination with you out there and my friendship with Eric, we would do a video about dive watches. And of course, the big question has been, what is a dive watch, and what does a dive watch mean today? And so, just kind of simply put, what do you think a dive watch is today?
Well, you know, kind of what we talked about before was a dive watch is something that helps us determine bottom time and things like that when we're diving, calculating time at depth when we're diving. But it's obviously also something that tells you just the time of day. So, I mean, it has a lot of different functions, but as a diver, I use it for telling me how far or how long I've been down, really. That's one of the most basic things.
Yeah, and most people don't realize that dive watches, water-resistant watches, came into being before scuba was even invented.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put a picture, and during the video, I'm going to put some close-ups of the different dive watches that we've got here and some of the ones that we're talking about. Now, I've also got out here a couple of dive computers, which a lot of time people call dive watches, and it kind of chokes me when people call a dive computer a dive watch.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's not that big a deal, but it still chokes me. When we are talking about these, I'm going to try to put some pictures, some photographs up here so you can see what we're talking about. And probably the thing we have to understand about a dive watch is, why is it a dive watch? And you made the statement, it helps us understand how long we've been underwater.
Yeah. The most basic function, I would think, right?
Exactly, and of course, as a diver, you folks out there know that what a dive computer does, it's our second brain.
Yeah.
Not only does it tell us how long we've been underwater, you know, you're going up too fast, you've stayed down too long, if it's air integrated, blah, blah. I mean, it's quite extensive. But in reality, what Eric was saying about time is what it's ultimately all about.
Yeah.
The bezel on a watch, most people don't even realize what the bezel is used for, and in reality, it's used to track your time underwater.
Yeah. Right.
So that when you get ready to go in, and different people set it different ways. In other words, some divers set their bezel based on when they drop in the water. Some divers wait till they get to depth
And set there.
to set their bezel. And of course, then what they do is when they either get back on the boat after doing a safety stop, or at the end of their dive, they look down to see what the bezel is telling them. It depends on the source that you're talking to as to what's the right or wrong way. You're gonna look at the different ways instructors teach scuba equipment assembly. So, there's a slight margin of error. How long is it gonna take you to drop off a boat and get to 60 feet?
Right.
Insignificant. In past, we used the Navy dive tables when I was in the Navy, and that's what it was all based on. And I was telling Eric, I've got a picture. I might put it up there if you guys ask me to. There's a picture of me standing on the front of a Navy dive boat in the Mediterranean in my wetsuit, and I'm wearing a DOXA, and I'm wearing a depth gauge.
Yeah.
This one happens to be, believe it or not, a depth gauge and compass combo. And this one is made by Healthways, and this is quite old, as a matter of fact.
Probably 60s?
Yeah.
Yeah, 60s
yeah,
probably?
mid-60s, that sort of thing. And I've done videos. I'll put a link up here for a video I did on some older dive equipment. When we start looking at water watches, would you agree with that terminology?
Absolutely, yeah.
Why would you say it water watch?
Anything that you're going to be able to do a water activity, a water sport with, whether the watch is water resistant or waterproof, which there's a difference between the two. So a basic, Timex or something might be water resistant to 25 or 30 feet, whereas a DOXA is going to be, 300 meters or something. So they're going to be different, but
Yeah.
water resistant or waterproof, so you can swim with it, you can boat with it, you can, any type of water activity. You don't have to worry about damaging skiing it. Yeah,
No,
skiing with it. Sure, absolutely.
And of course, the first water watches that were really out there were like Omega did the Marine in '32, and it wasn't a dive watch because it wasn't meant for diving.
For diving, yeah.
And then we had some of the others come along, like the Rolex Oyster.
Oyster, yeah.
And
Same thing, not meant for diving.
not meant for diving, but for swimming. And it's a known fact that the CEO of Rolex gave one of the Oysters, Rolex Oyster, to a secretary that was going to do a across the channel swim attempt. And she wore it around her neck.
Yeah.
And it worked the entire way. She didn't quite make it, but still, it worked the entire way. And that was probably the lead-in for Rolex's involvement in dive watches.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So along those same time, in the 30s, as we moved into the mid-later 30s, you had Panerai. And Panerai went to Rolex and got one of the, believe it or not, pocket watch mechanisms and put it in a case, and that became really the first Italian Navy dive watch.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, pretty amazing. And when you look at that watch, it was called the radio mirror. And if you look that up, you'll understand that means able to see the luminosity of the watch. And I think we'll agree, or we will all agree, that one of the major commonalities in dive watches is the legibility of it, whether it's a color or the digits or the hands.
Yeah.
Then they're very standoutish.
Sure.
I would say that a pilot's watch has a lot more going on. There are little dials within the dials and stuff like that.
True. Yeah.
that you don't necessarily have in a dive watch.
Sure.
In '53, Blancpain came out with a watch that's now pretty famous,
Yep.
called the 50 Fathoms.
Yep. Yep.
And the depth rating on that was 300 feet.
Yep. Yep.
And so we're starting to see the depth increase and some of the names being able to directly connect to SCUBA.
Yeah.
And then we see things like the use of the watches in the Second World War.
Yep.
And Mr. Cousteau and Mr. Gagon with Aqua Lung brand really brought into play DOXA, and the orange face DOXA became, because some of those DOXAs, if you look them up, they had the Aqua Lung logo on the dial.
On the face, yeah.
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 Which is pretty interesting. In '56, Panerai came out with a feature on their watch, and again, I'll do a close-up of the Panerais, and what it looks, they called it a bridge over the crown. And as the
Basically like a little arm that went around it to protect it from getting hit.
right, and that has a little lever on it to help hold down to make sure there's a little extra pressure on the crown, making sure it's extra water sealing. So that came into play, and of course, all of the dive watches began really improving the underwater visibility. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course, in '57, Breitling came out with the
Superocean.
Superocean.
Yeah.
What did you think of the Superocean?
I think it's a beautiful watch. I've been a Breitling fan for years, but I'm more of a Breitling aviation fan, aviation watch fan. But it's a beautiful watch. Breitling's not really known for dive watches, but certainly this was kind of one of the earliest ones, really.
And it was a 200-meter watch.
Yeah.
And like Eric is saying, Breitling has a very strong presence in aviation. So if you happen to look that up, you'll see a lot about that. In the air races and stuff, they're big supporters of these air races.
The Reno air races,
that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
In '67, '68, and in that time frame, we had DOXA come out with the famous orange face DOXA.
Yeah. This is actually a Synchron, but it's the same company that makes DOXA.
Right.
But this is essentially a DOXA timepiece. And it happens to have the Poseidon logo on it,
Yeah.
Which they have used for a few years as well on some of the other DOXAs.
When I say DOXA design, kind of whoever came out with the first case that looks like a specific brand, this they call the cushion case, I think.
I believe
is
so,
what
yeah,
they call
yeah.
that. So if you look at that watch, and I'm wearing a DOXA also that one of you viewers caught out there when I did the video on the new Shearwater Turn, and you'll notice Eric's wearing a Shearwater shirt.
I noticed it too, by the way.
Yeah. And so DOXA was big with that orange face, and actually there was a couple of companies like Omega and DOXA and a couple of other companies that were doing research into what was the most visible watch underwater. And it's quite interesting that orange came out strong. Now I'll tell you this, we're gonna do a part 2 about DOXA. So I'm not gonna say anything else. I'm gonna make you wait until part 2 on DOXA to tell you the rest of the story about them. And then of course we had Rolex come out with the Submariner.
Yep.
And Eric has one there. I'll let him tell you a little bit about it.
Well, this was, it made several iterations of the Rolex Submariner. and some were more basic, some were non-date. Like the numbers don't really matter, but there were 5512s, which was a chronometer, and then a 5513, which wasn't. This happens to be a single red sub where Submariner is written in red. It does have the tritium on the superluminova, I think is what they put on these. I don't remember exactly. Yeah. And over the years it's faded, but this kind of been a hallmark for diving for many years now, but we talked about the reasons why. Not necessarily the best or the first, but possibly the most well-known dive watch out there on the market.
And it's like anything else. I mean, you put the name Submariner on it, and every Submariner out there is going to want to wear one.
Right. Even if they're a tennis Submariner, or if they're a polo or a car Submariner, they're going to wear one. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You're going to notice, he said, it's kind of faded a little bit. Well, that's become the hallmark of a lot of watches out there today. They try to emulate that look,
that faded look,
with a current watch to make it look like an old watch, kind of like, again, what DOXA's done with this one, but you have to wait.
Or patina, people call it patina as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One watch that's not really known that well is the Zodiac Seawolf. And the Seawolf came out. It had some unusual features. I'll put a picture up here. It really deserves more credit than it got. It's been a little bit revived, as many of the watch brands have. It was waterproof down to 660 feet when it came out. I think the Rolex Submariner today is pretty well known as the dive watch daddy. I hate to use that term per se, but there was a lot of testing in the early 50s on the Submariners, and it was interesting because the Italian companies, the French companies, the Swiss, a lot of them were heavily involved in this because really, hey, that's where SCUBA started over there with Mr. Cousteau and Mr. Gagon, and a lot of development like that. A huge amount of testing went on. I think they call that place the Submersible Research or something like that in Cons France. And of course then in the 60s, we had a company come in to play that, I'll put some pictures of it up, that just about every service person in the 60s, especially later 60s, came home wearing.
Yeah, a Seiko.
The Seiko.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they were available all through the military exchange, whether it be the Post Exchange or the Navy Exchange or Air Force. Yeah. But they were inexpensive, and my gosh, for $25 you could get a dive watch that was waterproof to 300 meters.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the other things too is I think some of these, if you want to call them the forefathers of dive watches, started making these watches, and then a bunch of other companies kind of started following suit. So you don't hear people talk about like the Eterna Contiki. That was a watch that was used, by many people, and also the Jenny Caribbean. Jenny Caribbean had the same bezel that yours has, had two dials on the bezel. I forgot to mention that one.
Yeah.
So those were popular as well, and they started, I think a lot of companies said, hey, look, these are becoming popular. We have the technology. We can start making these dive watches with cases that'll tolerate pressures and depths and things like that. So I think a lot of players started to come into
and of course Seiko did bring a lot of interest. People that had Seiko dive watches, once they got back into public life and started making a better living and could afford something better than a Rolex Submariner was, or a Blancpain 50 Fathoms was definitely on the list. And because Rolex started with the Oyster had already developed and was seen as a great water resistant watch.
Yeah.
A lot of us don't realize that, but
Yeah.
really did. When we start thinking about those years as they went down, you know, you had a lot of research going on. Seiko was putting in a lot with its Antarctic research team. Then they came out with the 300-meter watch, and then they had a 600-meter titanium case watch, a 1,000-meter with a ceramic surround case, some things along those lines. So I think, in essence, Eric and I were talking about what would be today what we would consider the icons of dive watches.
Yeah.
And I think we came to a conclusion that, like the Seawolf, the DOXA Sub 300, the Panerai,
Omega Seamaster, yep. The Tudor Black Bay, yep.
and of course you've got the
Seiko.
Seiko SKX. You know, the whole story of dive watches and dive computers, and I'm going to throw a teaser out there. This DOXA, in my opinion, is what led to
Yep.
the
Computers.
dive computers you're wearing today. There's a bunch of milestones. I'm going to not bore you with that right this second, but I am going to, if you look down in the description, then you're going to see kind of the milestones of what Eric and I came up with as far as what dive watches really came to play and what we saw out there. A lot of this came, a lot of the popularity of dive watches came to play from movies.
Absolutely. Top Gun.
Top Gun with Tom Cruise and,
Yep.
and Sean Connery.
007, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Tom Hanks in
Apollo.
the Apollo 13.
Yep.
And the Speedmaster, Omega Speedmaster.
Yeah.
I happened to had one of those at a time.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty
Beautiful
good.
watches.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
So I think today, yes, I own an Apple Ultra, but personally I don't wear it as a dive computer. Actually, that's my Taric.
Yeah.
And Eric has a Taric also.
Yeah.
I just did a video about the Shearwater Turn, and I'll put a link right up here. It was introduced at DEMA. That is a very interesting dive computer that is easily worn as a daily watch. I did another video at DEMA about Garmin's M Mark III. This is the Descent Mark II S. So if you want to watch that, I'll put a link up there for that one. For me, I think the reason dive watches have become so popular, and there's dive watches everything from $39
Yep.
up to
1600.
the big draw about a dive watch is, yeah, it says you're a diver. Is it a smartwatch? No. And some of the times, if you see me diving, I'll have a dive watch on this wrist, and I've got a dive computer on that
Sure,
wrist.
absolutely.
But I think a lot of times when you see divers in public, they're wearing a watch because they know it's tough.
It's tough, durable.
It has a bold look.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit of a status symbol.
Sure, it's an image. It's the image,
but,
right, sure.
But it's okay. You're divers. Be proud of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, absolutely.
That's a reason I wanted Eric to join me and do this video for you divers out there, so you see a little bit of the history. Bob Collins for Diver Supply here with my buddy Eric. Thanks for watching. Please hit the subscribe button if you're not a subscriber already. And as we always say here at Diver Supply, dive safe out there. Thanks for watching.